Welcome to the Intuitive Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Rafferty, medical doctor, PhD, Reiki and Shamanic intuitive healer. I'm here to bring you on a journey of holistic healing that explores the science of the physical body, combined with mental and emotional well-being, energetic and spiritual health. And I am so delighted that you have joined me today because I'm going to be exploring comparison. So it's been so interesting over the last couple of weeks because I'm seeing it a lot in my practice, even within my own world. And I really wanted to focus in on this comparison wound because it can actually be a really deep psychological wound that can have a huge impact on ourselves and our whole life. So, all through kind of my earlier stages with opening my business, I constantly compared myself to other people that had started out in this entrepreneurial path. And what do other healers do? How do other people run their businesses? And I see in my practice an awful lot, there's a lot of energy disturbance in people's bodies as a result of this wound of comparison. So in this episode today, I'm hoping to expose a little bit of the psychological and the energetic roots associated with comparison and show how it distorts our identity, how it fractures our own sense of self-trust, and also really just touch into the fact that it's a leak in our life force energy, in our creative flow. And I'm going to offer some tools at the end of this episode just to help people reclaim their sovereignty and their sense of self so that they can be anchored in their own body and their own journey and not projecting their energy into other people's stories. So that's where we are going to go with this. So, I was reading something lovely during the week in which it was discussing what comparison is. And it's a thief. Comparison is a thief of your joy. And, it's the ghost of joy. It almost like haunts you as you move through life. Because in reality, it's a reflection of someone else's world. It's not our world. We're looking into what they're projecting out into the world. And a lot of the time these days, actually what we see on social media and in the world around us, it isn't actually a true representation of exactly where people are at or who they are and what their life really looks like. So, I always tend to find that if we compare ourselves to others, it's often because we've forgotten who we are. So I'm hoping that this episode will help us to remember the light and the magic that exists within us rather than looking to others in this kind of comparative way. So generally speaking, we are wired to measure ourselves in relation to the tribe. So this is an ancestral kind of trait in which, back in the day, you would you'd be out and you would be in your tribal energy and you'd compare yourself in order to feel safe and maintain a sense of belonging. Am I keeping up with the tribe? Will I be excluded if XYZ happens? And this was part of our ancestral makeup in which we basically fit into the community. However, in the world today, there are millions and millions of beautifully curated images and projections of illusions of how people live their lives. These aren't real lived human experiences, and they're often covered with 2 or 3 beautiful filters. So when you actually really kind of sit and you look at this, you kind of think to yourself, well, what's actually going on here? It maybe it isn't necessarily about what they have. It's more about what you've disowned within your own self. So what I tend to see with this is that we tend to have envy for other people or the positions that they are projecting out into the world, when we haven't actually allowed ourselves to fully claim those things within ourselves. I don't necessarily feel that a comparison is admiration in any way. I tend to actually feel it energetically as misdirected grief. It's the soul saying, that was meant to be me. Like, why are they there and I'm here? And a lot of times it's because we haven't allowed ourselves to step fully into our power and allow our destiny unfold in a way that our soul is desperately yearning for. So, where do the origins of these wounds come from? Generally speaking, it tends to be from childhood. Let's be honest. A lot of these wounds can be from these type of places. So it generally is a symptom of a child that was just craving love and craving kind of to be seen by their caregivers. I often tend to find that some of the childhood imprints could be linked to potential sibling rivalry. So, why can't you be more like your brother? Why can't you be as good as your sister? Your brother always does this. Your sister always does this. So, have a little sit and a think of what the relational dynamics was like in your home in relation to your siblings. And at the moment, what I'm seeing in practice is a lot of, on an energetic level, how a sibling might step in to a role with a parent that blocks the parent from actually seeing you. So that is absolutely fascinating on an energetic level. It's almost like the view from the parent into your eyes has been blocked. So have a little think about it. Did you feel potentially growing up that one or both of your parents were looking into the eyes of a sibling rather than seeing you for what you were achieving and going on a journey with? Speaking of achievement, I tend to find that some people grew up in homes where actually love was achievement based. You know, it's we're very proud of you when you win or when you succeed or when you reach certain milestones. That's when the love comes in. And that could be for school grades, it could be for competitions, popularity. All of these things can form a thought or the structure within our minds that, I'm loved if I obtain or do X. And that's really, really tricky because, then we kind of go into this hyper yang state where we're constantly trying to achieve because it's mixed up in our sense of self. It's entangled in this energy of self-worth. And, feeling seen is associated with being loved on a deeper level when we achieve things. So our love essentially had to be earned by being better and better at different things. So, we didn't learn in those circumstances that being loved was actually given to us for just being us. And that can be deeply wounding for people. So, what that wound actually leaves is a scar. We constantly scan ourselves, we scan other people, and we have, maybe some low grade anxiety when other people win or succeed. Maybe you become hyper vigilant around other people's successes. And this can be a symptom of, like I say, of us not being seen when we were younger for just being ourselves. So, it's worthwhile having a little think about those things in relation to your own childhood and what that might have looked like when you were little. So, generally speaking, I tend to find that comparison can impact us in several different ways. So, mentally, it can cause our thoughts to race. And, just as an example of this, when maybe we see our friends that are experiencing something that we wish we were experiencing, or you see something online, this kind of projected image of someone thriving, and you are back here thinking to yourself, I am only surviving. How the hell are they out there thriving? An internal story kicks in, that I should be there, I should be where they are right now. And this mental loop kicks off a cascade of events in the body, sometimes in really kind of significant situations. You can end up in a sense of collapse. We can go into a state of procrastination where we actually just tap out and go into a self-destruct mode. Or in some circumstances, we begin to mimic other people's behaviors because we're like, well, if they're thriving, maybe if I just copy what they do, I'll get to that space. However, when we actually begin doing that, we actually disconnect from our own soul's purpose. We're actually projecting ourselves into someone else's timeline, essentially. So that on a mental level can cause racing thoughts and, this constant benchmarking of where you are in relation to somebody else. And it kind of disconnects us from our own original vision and our intuition about where we're going to go with things. Should I be doing what they're doing? It gives us kind of anxiety about our journey in this world. And, sometimes this can become an obsession. And when people come into me, they're like, I'm obsessed with this person's Instagram profile. And it's just so beautifully curated and created. But it is a facade of what they want to project out into the world. And, when we're obsessed with someone else's life, we're essentially disconnected from our own. So keeping that in mind. On an emotional level, we tend to take on this kind of stormy weather of someone else's journey. We're not actually tuned into our own frequency. We're tuned into someone else's frequency when we project ourselves into their space. And that can bring up a lot for us. We can enter into a space of kind of feeling shameful about where we're at, the decisions that we've made, about regret that we haven't made different decisions. You can end up resenting yourself and other people around you. You can end up with a terrible inferiority complex, or maybe you have imposter syndrome. And then in some circumstances, we go into this space where we actually overcompensate. We give too much. We're just projecting all of our energy outwards. And that can be really, really tough going on our emotional body, So in certain circumstances, I find that it brings a lot of emotional lability into our energy systems. And you can kind of oscillate between the sense of envy and a sense of kind of emotional collapse, where we go into a self-destructive mode. And this kind of cycling between these types of emotions can occur quite frequently. Now, on an energetic level, this is an absolute sign of a leaky energy in your energy system. So it's a sign that your aura has some leaky spots and that potentially your boundaries aren't really where they need to be. Now, boundaries, I have to tell you, I could talk about boundaries in every single podcast episode that I do because they are so, so important. And sometimes, it's not necessarily about having boundaries from other people coming in on top of us, even though that's really important. But what do boundaries with yourself look like? What you allow yourself to think and do? And what's your journey with your own personal boundaries like? And, on an energetic level, sometimes people start trying to mimic other people's behaviors. Sometimes they wear the same clothes, they dress the same, and they go into a sense, especially for entrepreneurial life, they begin marketing the same way that they do. And you see this all the time on Instagram. It's become just a marketplace, really, a place where people sell their courses and all of these different things. And I know I definitely fall into that space too. So it can be really a tricky journey, but it's important to kind of think about these things and recognize where you may be falling into a space in which you're not respecting your own boundaries. Are you mimicking how other people are showing up on their journey? And do you feel like you've leaky energy in your energy field? And essentially, I'm just going to say it, even though it can be really hard to hear in a lot of ways, but comparison is spiritual trespassing. You're stepping into someone else's energy and projecting yourself into their energy space. And, that isn't fair on them. But also, it rips you away from your own energy field and the places that you are meant to be. You're essentially living in someone else's shadow. And that's not what we came here to do. Sure, it's not. And then also on a physical level. So, like I speak into in some other podcast episodes, I tend to find that mental, emotional, and energetic impacts tend to ultimately end in physical body disturbance. And I tend to find with the clients that I talk to, with my own journey with comparison, sometimes our chest gets a little bit tight, our breathing might change, we get tension in the body, in our belly, in our jaw, and we go into a state of nervous system dysregulation. So this can be really, really important, because if you have done a deep scrolling session on social media, potentially you've ended up in a state of dopamine withdrawal. You have used up all of your heavy hitting dopamine energy in your brain from seeing all of these things on social media, and you just feel wrecked. This constant hit of dopamine every time you see one of these circumstances or situations that kind of puts you in a state of comparison. Do you feel exhausted after your time on the gram? So, if you find that you're going into spaces with certain people or perhaps on social media and you're suddenly feeling empty, and, if that is the case, and you're really kind of getting into a space where you're really viewing yourself in not a very good light after these kind of interactions, even though nothing is actually wrong, it's time to actually get real with yourself and just think, what am I doing here? This is self-sabotaging. And that is not the place to be. That's not where we want to be. We want to be sovereign in our energy. We want to be standing in our power and our energetic light and not projecting it into someone else's story. So, how do we go about rewriting this journey for ourselves? So, I've spoken a little bit previously into cord cutting. And that's basically cutting cords with any energies, any energetic imprints that aren't for our greatest good. And we can do this with people, with places, with entities, with so much stuff. I love a good cord cutting ritual. So sometimes what I do is I sit down, I journal about everything. I really get my head clear on where I'm at with a lot of stuff. And I really identify what I want to release and let go of. Now, through my shamanic training, and shamans love a good fire ceremony, I tend to love using all of these beautiful kind of tools to really do a good job at cutting energy. So I write things down, I identify what I want to let go of, and I'll do a little ritual or a ceremony around releasing the energy. So essentially, once I've identified what I want to cut cords with, I'll go into sacred ceremony, and essentially I'll speak out the words that speak best into my soul. So something like, I cut the energetic cords with the illusion of who I think I should be. And, I call all of my energy, I call all of my strength, and I call my sovereignty back to my body. I return to my path. I reclaim my energy for my journey with my destiny. And then what I'll do is, once I've said that, I'll burn the pages and let go of everything that I no longer want to identify by, or I'm really looking to let go of. And, I do cord cutting twice a day. I do it before work. I cut the cords with all energies, entities, or lower vibrational things that are out there in the world that aren't for my greatest good. I cut cords with any energetic darkness that comes into my body, because believe me, there is Working as a shaman, I have seen some dark stuff. And I just call the light. I'm only aligned with the light. I'm aligned with my soul's destiny, my soul's purpose. I do that every day before work. I will cleanse my energy after each client. And then at the end of the day, again, I will cut cords with anything that is not for my greatest good. So I do it several times a day to keep my energy as fresh and so clean as it can be. But it's really good to start taking a deeper dive into all of this stuff. But essentially, like I say, when you project your energy into someone else's energy field, into their story, you're trespassing in their world. And you know what? You're here to go on your own journey. So reclaim all of that energy that you've given or projected away and use it to forge your own path forward. Use that energy and that kind of creative flow to actually move in a direction that your soul wants to move in. A lot of the time, we don't give ourselves enough time to actually sit and ask our soul, ask our heart what it wants to do. So I tend to recommend, if you're someone that does a deep comparison with social media, give yourself a social media fast. Give yourself a detox from the timeline. And even, if you're finding that you're comparing yourself to a lot of other people, I tend to see this for a lot of my really beautiful fertility clients as well, when they see the news of a pregnancy. It can be so heartbreaking in so many ways, but we never really truly know what each other's journey has been. Some people have been on journeys for many years. And, we all find our way to certain paths at different times. So, we don't know when or how someone else started their path. So it's just important to stay in our lane on our path of destiny. But generally with timeline fasts, I tend to recommend no social media, no consumption or comparison in any way. Just allow yourself to sit in your own space. And what I really love with these kind of fasts is kind of setting aside some dedicated time to actually create something from scratch yourself. So maybe it's your sitting with your words, and that's through journaling. Maybe you're into music. Maybe it's just about speaking your truth out into the world, and finding a way to create something, even in 5 or 10 minutes, that was done in a way that let your soul shine. So yes, I absolutely love that as a tool to maybe navigate through some of this stuff. No scrolling, no comparison, and actually allowing yourself to create from scratch, to just show that you can do it. And, do it in a way that feels authentic and right to your soul. It's also really important on this journey with comparison to anchor yourself into your own identity. Who are you? Have you ever thought about that? Maybe some really good journaling prompts are to sit with kind of thoughts or themes associated with values. What values do I refuse to compromise on? I love that, because when we have a value system, it acts as an anchor, and it acts as a beautiful sail by which we can navigate our way forward. So what are your values? What do you refuse to compromise on? What feels right in your heart and your soul? I also would love for you to sit and contemplate what you are building that nobody else could. What original thing are you building in this world that nobody else could? And, I really struggled with this for many, many years. Especially in an entrepreneurial setting. I wear so many hats as an energy healer, as a doctor, as an acupuncturist. But, it's really important to sit and think, well, how do I weave all of these things together in a really authentic way? And I used to use really kind of strict medical protocols, because I was like, well, that's what I've been told that I need to do. Or I'd look to people for permission in order to do it the way that I felt intuitively was the right way for each one of my individual clients. And, it took a long time to give myself permission to show up in a way that was actually authentic to what I was building in the world. And to allow my intuition to shine through, and to allow kind of all of the energetics of what I'd spent so long cultivating to show up in the most authentic and beautiful way. And I know now that what I'm building on a business side of things, it is something that nobody else can do, because I've allowed myself to go on a journey with what my gifts look like. But keeping in mind, at the start of this journey, I did compare myself to others. And funnily enough, the thing that actually became the most comparative element was the stuff that I'd learned that everybody else had learned. All the doctors had learned a way to do this, you know? And actually, I kept a lot of what my gift was with my energetic healing and my vision through my shamanic work. That was in the shadow. You know, I was like, well, you know, I'll sit with things because I know all about the gut. I know about the vagina microbiome. I have a desire to support people from a fertility perspective, and all of these beautiful kind of things that I'd learned. But like, I was still doing it on a tick list and looking for permission based on what other people had built. But when I allowed myself to fully sit into actually what my gifts were and show up in a way that nobody else that I know was showing up, that is when my business began to thrive. That is when my heart felt like it was alive and singing. So now what I do is I journey with that every day. At the end of every day, I just think, what an amazing day I had with these beautiful clients today. Because actually, I'm living and building a soul-led business based on what my gifts are, what my spiritual gifts and my energetic gifts are. So maybe have a little sit and a think about what you want to build in the world, and what are your gifts that maybe you're not allowing to radiate as strongly as you could because you're following the same footsteps that other people have. Really important things to sit and identify. And also, another thing with regard to kind of anchoring your identity is to identify, you know, who are you when nobody's watching? What do you love to do? What do you do when it's just you and your soul is allowed to be radiant and shine in a way where you don't fear judgment? So they're all really good things to kind of allow yourself to sit with who you are and kind of who you are in the world in the most quirky and weird and fabulous way. Now, I also want to kind of touch on kind of shifting our mindset a little bit when it comes to celebrating others. So I think, like I say, sometimes, you know, when we compare ourselves to we use it as a measuring stick of what we aren't doing right. But let's use their success as a mirror for ourselves. And actually, maybe it's about giving thanks. Thank you so much for showing me what's possible, you know, showing me what could potentially be on the cards for me down the line. You know, this belongs to me. Call in the energy of how you're going to embody that energy when the divine timing comes, that you can step into that energy and own that in your own authentic way. So what I encourage you to do is celebrate success, celebrate other people, you know, really, really allow yourself to sit into that energy of, if they can do it, you know, this is a wonderful barometer for success that I'm capable of doing too. So don't allow yourself to collapse in on yourself or allow envy to hit. Allow yourself to actually sit and be like, okay, this is good. This is good. It is a benchmark and a barometer for where I can potentially go. In these circumstances where you feel your nervous system being activated, I also encourage doing some centering breathing. You know, I love kind of box breathing where you inhale for a certain count, you hold for a certain count, you exhale for a certain count, and you hold for a certain count. I tend to recommend doing it in kind of counts of 4. So inhaling for 4, holding for 4, exhaling for 4, and holding for 4. And just calling your energy back to your body. So as you inhale, you're just saying, I belong. And as you're holding that, you're just saying, I am here. And as you're exhaling, you're just saying to yourself, I'm here now, you know? And even as you hold further, you're just saying, I am in my body. I am solid. I am still. I am present with myself. So returning to yourself with some lovely nervous system practices. And I love breathing as a way to do that. Also, grounding can be lovely. Getting your feet out on the earth, which is so, so nice. That's a really lovely way to do that. And potentially you have some other tools in which you use to come back to your body. So I really love this kind of relationship with returning home to yourself. And, if we really sit with this, what does that look like? It looks like saying to yourself, there's no one ahead of me. There's nobody behind me, because there's only me on this journey, walking your path in your shoes, in your time, based on the design of what your soul came to do, stepping onto that path and walking in your own shoes, the path of your own destiny. And, I talk about this all the time with my clients. From an ancestral perspective, sometimes what happens is these shoes about what's expected and the path that people are expected to walk are handed down from one generation to the next. You are then handed these shoes that have walked the same footsteps all through the timelines. And you're handed these shoes and you put them on without even realizing they're not yours. And after many, many years of walking these footsteps, walking this path that was handed down to you, was fated to you by your family lineage, you start to go, my toes are bloody sore. Don't like these shoes. Actually, they don't fit me. They don't go with what I'm wearing. And that is a really beautiful time on your journey where you take off those shoes. You don't have to walk in the path or the footsteps of your ancestors. You can go and buy yourself a new pair of shoes and rewrite how you want to show up in the world. And one of the beautiful teachers and mentors that I have learned a lot from on my shamanic path, he always says, fate is fatal. It is fatal. And, you are fated through your ancestral and family history to show up and walk in a certain way in this world. However, when we can take off those shoes of our ancestors and we can step into our own new shoes, we then walk on the path of destiny. We've stepped off the path of fate, which is fatal, which has been handed down to us, and we step onto our own path of destiny, which is our unique soul's journey in this world. So that is really what I hope for all of you listen to this, is that you can begin to sit down, have a little conversation with yourself and identify, where am I showing up in relation to how my family have shown up? What looping patterns of behaviors have been handed down through my family lineage? And actually, am I still walking in the shoes of the people who came before me? And I have to tell you, comparison is so huge within the Irish culture. And, what would the neighbours think situation where we show up in a way, it's almost like a facade because we don't want to be outdone by the neighbours, and we don't want their shame or their judgment projected onto us. So this can be deeply rooted within our cultural history too, our societal norms. So, it's time to break free from all of this stuff and to walk your sovereign path. And, that means really stepping away from this energy of comparison. Comparison is the language of scarcity, but what your soul wants to speak is originality. Your soul is timeless, it's unshakable. And I really just am so excited for you guys to step fully into the magic of the energy of what your soul is here to do. And if we continue to compare ourselves to how other souls are living and moving through this world, we will never fully come home to ourselves so that the true light of our originality and our soul can shine as brightly and as amazingly as possible. So, like I say, it's not your job here as this beautiful, unique soul to compete with other people. Your job is to remember. It is to remember the true, authentic light that you hold in your heart, in your body, and allow that to shine as a sovereign individual that doesn't follow the call of everybody else. You are anchored in your own being. And you are here to transmit that beautiful, original light that nobody else can do other than you. So, with love from my heart to yours, have the most beautiful time navigating comparison, and I will chat to you in 2 weeks.